Welcome back to Bombastic Nation, a ting. Back with some more vibes for all you. Yes, you know what I mean? And as you all could tell, I'm trying something a little bit new. Work in progress back here. I'm gonna put some stuff up on the walls and stuff, but I'm just trying stuff out here, new stuff. I got kind of tired of sitting in front of that black and blue foam echo things there, so I'm trying something new. Got some new lens and stuff, so I'm gonna try something new. Now, if you notice, there's a big old shine going on the forehead here, man. I fell at work, bam, hit my head. It was huge, man. It was like this big old knot on my forehead and thing, but that was Wednesday, I do believe. So I iced it up and stuff, and now I'm doing decent. Now let's get into the video. Now, somebody had pointed out to me that I didn't finish the Napoleon series. My apologies. I thought I had. I really did, but apparently not. This one is called Napoleon's Retreat from Moscow, 1812. And this is my reaction for it. A link will be in the description for this video, so check that out. You know what I mean? And as usual, I'm Mr. Giant. And we're going to go ahead and YouTube and simmer. Let's go! Yeah.
Russia, 1812. Napoleon invades his former ally with the largest army Europe has ever seen. But for the French Emperor, the decisive blow remains frustratingly beyond reach. Russia's resilience is unlike anything he's ever encountered. And as winter closes in, his army begins the most infamous retreat in history.
Infamous retreat.
The 15th of September, 1812. 83 days after invading Russia, a week after his costly victory at Berezina, Napoleon entered Moscow. He expected to be greeted by dignitaries, formally offering the city's surrender. Instead, he discovered that 90% of Moscow's inhabitants had fled. A fire had started the previous night and was blamed on drunken soldiers. But over the next 48 hours, fires continued to break out across Moscow until most of the city was ablaze. Count Fyodor Rostopchin.
I'm telling you, man, them Russians ain't no joke. They will fight till the last man. I mean, look at the revolutions they've had recently and stuff, Lenin, I'm talking about Lenin and them. I mean, they will fight. They ain't gonna lay down. That's just crazy. Of course, they have a longer history than most of this part of the world. There's a longer history, so they have a history of fighting battles and stuff like that to either gain freedom or, whatever it is. But you come in there, they're gonna be burning the city down. That's crazy, boo. They don't joke.
Until most of the city was ablaze. Count Fyodor Rostopchin, the city's governor, had ordered that Moscow be destroyed rather than allowed to fall into enemy hands. And now fires were being started deliberately by Russian criminals freed from jail and acting on police orders.
And the criminals even patriotic.
Shot any they could catch. But the inferno was impossible to contain. In 4 days, 2/3 of Moscow was destroyed.
Wow. They burn everything.
Finally under control, Napoleon's soldiers turned their attention to systematically looting the ruined city. While from his new quarters in the Kremlin, Napoleon sent a letter to Emperor Alexander in St. Petersburg, inviting him to make peace and end the war. He received no reply. Napoleon waited, confident that Alexander would eventually negotiate. But as as the days passed, he grew increasingly uneasy. Cossack raids were disrupting his vital communications with Paris, as well as the arrival of supplies. While the steady attrition of French forces and Russian reinforcements meant Napoleon was outnumbered for the first time in the campaign. Rumors also reached him that his reluctant allies, Prussia and Austria, were in secret talks with his enemies. Napoleon had proposed that the army winter in Moscow, but that now looked too dangerous. Reluctantly, he accepted that the army would have to move back to Smolensk to find safe winter quarters. Napoleon knew how severe Russian winters could be, but continued to put off his departure, reassured by fine October weather, and hoping that at the last minute there might be a message from Alexander offering peace. It never came. On the 13th of October, the first light snow fell.
Ooh.
5 days later, Kutuzov launched a surprise attack on Murat's advance guard at Vinkova and defeated it. Napoleon, stung into action, gave the order for the army to leave Moscow the next day. Our video sponsor, the legendary World of Tanks, is the home of online multiplayer armored mayhem.
Now is the moment my campaign begins. Emperor Alexander of Russia. Time to pounce, because my man is on the run. He waited a little bit too long on the first bit of wind to start hitting.
100,000 men of the Grande Armée left Moscow in a column 10 miles long, with an estimated 40,000 carriages and carts. There were women and children too, army wives and the vivandières, the women who cooked for the soldiers, as well as some civilians. Every wagon and pack was stuffed with as much food and loot as possible. As he set off, Sergeant Bourgogne of the Imperial Guard made an inventory of his pack. It contained several pounds of sugar, some rice, some biscuit, half a bottle of liqueur, a woman's Chinese silk dress embroidered in gold and silver, several gold and silver ornaments, amongst them a piece of the cross of Ivan the Great. Besides these, I had my uniform, a woman's large riding cloak, 2 silver pictures in relief, 12 inches long and 8 high, all in the finest workmanship. Also several lockets and a Russian prince's spittoon set with precious stones. I wore over my shirt a yellow silk waistcoat, which I had made myself out of a woman's skirt. Over that, a large cape lined with ermine and a large pouch, hung at my side by a silver cord. This was full of various things, amongst them a crucifix in gold and silver, and a little Chinese porcelain vase. Then there were my firearms, powder flask, and 60 cartridges in the box. This heavily
Going off to
encumbered
war.
army did not yet realize it was in a race against time. The Russians were beginning to move against the flanks of Napoleon's 550-mile deep salient. That very day, Wittgenstein's army was driving back Marshal Saint-Cyr's outnumbered force at Polotsk and drawing Victor's 9th Corps west to support them. In the south, Admiral Chichagov's advance and Schwarzenberg's Austrian Corps falling back to cover Warsaw.
They're getting pushed.
The border was closing. And then there was the weather. Though Napoleon was confident his army could reach winter quarters in Smolensk in 20 days, well before the more extreme temperatures were due to hit.
-5 degrees. Man, how do you guys live in that kind of a
Napoleon
weather?
planned to withdraw via Kaluga, through unspoilt country where the army could forage for supplies. But Kutuzov sent General Dokhturov's 6th Corps to block the road at Maloyaroslavets.
Wow.
In fierce fighting, Italian troops of Eugene's 4th Corps drove the Russians out of the town. It was a hard-won victory, reminiscent of the fighting at Berezina. Kutuzov now stood between Napoleon and Kaluga. Napoleon now took the unusual step of conferring with his marshals. And after discussing various options, he decided that rather than seek another major battle, they would retreat the way they'd come, along the Smolensk road. Napoleon had hoped to avoid this route, as it meant marching back through country already stripped bare of supplies. The day after the fighting
They
at Maloyaroslavets,
deterred them into a place where they won't even get food.
Of Cossacks, and saved only by General Rapp's charge at the head of his escort. After this close shave, Napoleon had a phial of poison made up, which he carried around his neck in case of capture.
Wow. Those who were too weak to carry their weapons or knapsacks threw them away, and all looked like a crowd of gypsies. Private Jacob Walter. They're just tossing stuff now. Light carrying.
Napoleon's army set off on its new course, shadowed at a respectful distance by Kutuzov's army to the south. They passed the old battlefield of Berezina, a grisly, unnerving sight where crows pecked at half-buried corpses. Relentless marching quickly began to tire out men and horses. A few days later, the temperature fell below freezing.
Man.
The army's overworked, starving
-4
horses died en masse. Discipline began to break down, as some
course.
drivers simply dumped the sick and wounded by the roadside to try to ensure their own survival. As the French column became increasingly strung out, General Miloradovich, commanding Kutuzov's advance guard, fell on Davout's rear guard outside Vyazma. For a few hours, Davout's first corps was cut off until Eugene and Ney came to his rescue. The battle ended with street fighting in Vyazma as the French hastily evacuated the burning town. For the soldiers of the Grande Armée, so unaccustomed to retreats and routes, Vyazma was an alarming, demoralizing blow.
Yep, they were winning all these years. The roads were strewed with the dead. Our suffering exceeded imagination. General Rapp. Wow.
The 4th of November, it began to snow heavily. The next night, temperatures plummeted to -20 degrees centigrade. Few men or women had proper winter clothing or access to shelter. Many froze to death overnight. The next morning, wagons and guns were abandoned. Many soldiers sought to save themselves, ignoring officers, stealing horses and food, and leaving the column to scour the countryside for supplies. Many of these foragers were found
Total
by the
disarray.
Cossacks. Some cut down or lanced, others robbed of every possession and left to freeze. In a few cases, they were handed over to peasants, eager for retribution against the foreign invaders who had plundered all they owned. As the army struggled on towards Smolensk through blizzards, Napoleon ordered Eugene's 4th Corps to strike out for Vitebsk, where there were large French supply depots. But Vitebsk had already fallen to the Russians.
Oh man.
The 4th Corps was too weak to fight its way through, and rejoined the army, minus its artillery and most of its baggage. A colonel who saw 4th Corps at this stage described men without shoes, almost without clothes, exhausted and famished, sitting on their packs, sleeping on their knees, and only rousing themselves out of this stupor to grill slices of horse meat or melt bits of ice. Just 3 weeks after leaving Moscow, a third of the army was dead or captured. About half the rest formed a growing army of stragglers, men without units, prepared to fight only to survive.
Man, that has to be totally demoralizing. They've been winning, and now all of a sudden they're retreating. The enemy isn't really attacking them, just Mother Nature. Mother Nature is just taking care of business. That is, I can't imagine going through that march. That's got to be a hell march. You know what I mean? They're turning on each other. Survival of the fittest. Wow. We do some crazy things, us humans, man. We do some crazy, crazy stuff.
Napoleon reached Smolensk on the 9th of November. The first troops into town ransacked the supply depots, leaving nothing for those who followed, including Ney's rearguard, which arrived 6 days later. Napoleon had hoped to make Smolensk his winter base, but the state of the army and lack of supplies meant the retreat had to continue.
Wow.
But the 5 days he spent there gave Kutuzov time to circle ahead and prepare an ambush.
They're like hyenas just circling.
30 miles west of Smolensk at Krasny. In 3 days of desperate fighting through knee-deep snow, Napoleon used his Imperial Guard to hold open the road, as Eugene and Davout's corps fought their way through the ambush with heavy losses. 2 regiments of the Young Guard were ordered to make a sacrificial counterattack to keep the Russians at bay, and were virtually annihilated.
Wow. They just went to their deaths.
Kutuzov held back many of his troops and was blamed for not trying to destroy Napoleon's army when he had the chance. It's possible he was concerned at the number of raw conscripts in his own army, also suffering terribly in the freezing conditions.
All the Cossacks and the Russians in the world shall not prevent me from rejoining the army. Marshal Ney? Why?
Not every French corps broke through at Krasny. Marshal Ney and his 6,000-strong rearguard arrived on the 18th of November to find the road blocked by 60,000 Russian troops, and no sign of the promised support from Davout's First Corps. Ney's men hurled themselves against the Russian lines with desperate courage, but were mown down, rejecting several invitations.
At that point, it ain't courage. I mean, what are they gonna do? They could turn back. They're gonna die that way. But if they fight, they might just get through. So, you know, it ain't courage. Survival that's going on there.
To surrender, Ney led the survivors in a daring night crossing of the Dnieper River. Then across 45 miles of open country under constant attack from Platov's Cossacks to reach Osha. By the time Ney rejoined the army, his rear guard was down to just 800 fighting men, leading a column of several thousand stragglers. The army regarded his escape as a miracle, and when Napoleon heard of it, he immediately dubbed Marshal Ney the bravest of the brave.
Survival, man. This is the beginning to be very serious. Napoleon to General Caulaincourt.
Napoleon had escaped one trap, but now 3 Russian armies were closing in from different directions and outnumbered him nearly 3 to 1.
He ain't got nowhere to go.
East, Kutuzov's main army with 65,000 men. From the north, Wittgenstein with 30,000, steadily driving back Marshal Victor's 9th Corps. And from the south, Admiral Chichagov's army of Moldavia with 34,000, having detached General Ostensaken with 30,000 to prevent Schwarzenberg's Austrians and Reynier's Saxon Corps marching to Napoleon's aid. Napoleon was heading for Minsk, a major French supply base with vast stores of the food, clothing, shoes and ammunition that his army so desperately needed. But on the 21st of November, disastrous news arrived.
Oh yeah.
Minsk had fallen to Chichagov.
It's over.
Marched on Borisov, driven out the Polish garrison, and captured its bridge over the Berezina river.
Woo.
By
Whoa.
nights, the Berezina ought to have frozen solid by now, so Napoleon could have crossed anywhere. But a sudden thaw had turned the river into a torrent of ice.
Mother Nature is not in his favor.
Napoleon was at least joined by the hard-fighting Marshal Oudinot and his Second Corps, which hadn't suffered as badly as the main column on its retreat from Polotsk. Oudinot launched an immediate counterattack on Borisov and retook the town, but couldn't stop the Russians burning the bridge. With
Stop that retreat route.
miles in either direction, it seemed Napoleon's exhausted army was finally doomed. But there was one sliver of hope. Polish cavalry had found a ford across the river near the village of Studienka. Napoleon issued a flurry of orders. Second Corps was to fake preparations for a river crossing south of Borisov. Victor's 9th Corps, arriving from the north, was to form a rear guard east of Studienka to hold the Russians at bay, while engineers worked as quickly as possible to build pontoon bridges across the river and win Napoleon's army a fighting chance of escape.
Man, our situation is unparalleled. If Napoleon extricates himself today, he must have the devil in him.
On the afternoon of the 25th of November, General Eblé's Dutch engineers began building two 300-foot pontoon bridges across the Berezina River. They worked day and night, sometimes chest deep in freezing water, and completed both bridges in less than 24 hours. Few of the engineers survived the ordeal.
I mean, they're doing that knowing they probably aren't going to make
The
it.
diversion south of Borisov, and was moving his troops south to face it, allowing Napoleon's army to begin crossing its rickety bridges virtually unopposed. Oudinot's Second Corps led the way to secure a bridgehead, followed the next day by the remnants of the main army. Priority was given to formed troops, still able to fight. For the time being, the army's vast crowd of stragglers remained on the far bank. By the time Chichagov realized his mistake and began moving north, Napoleon had troops in place to defend the crossing. On the east bank, General Partonneux's 12th Division, 4,000 relatively fresh troops from Victor's 9th Corps, formed the rear guard. As Platov's Cossacks approached from the east, the vanguard of Kutuzov's main army, Partonneux tried to rejoin 9th Corps. But caught in a swirling blizzard,
Here comes Mother Nature again.
50 meters, he marched straight into Wittgenstein's army. His entire division was killed or captured.
Wow.
The next
was
morning,
this close.
Chichagov and Wittgenstein launched coordinated attacks on both sides of the river. There was desperate fighting on the west bank, where Marshal Oudinot was, yet again, seriously wounded, but his Swiss infantry held the line, until General Doumerc's cuirassiers, the army's last heavy cavalry, charged and routed the Russians. At great cost, Polish and German troops of Victor's rear guard held off the Russians until dark, then pulled back across the bridges. For 2 nights, officers had been trying to get the vast camp of stragglers to cross the bridges when they weren't being used. But with temperatures reaching -30 centigrade, they'd preferred to stay put, huddled around their fires. At dawn on the 29th, with the army leaving and the Russians approaching, thousands of stragglers surged in panic towards the bridges. Dozens were crushed underfoot. Others fell or were pushed into the water, or tried
Freezing
to swim,
water.
which was certain death. When French engineers burned the bridges at 9 a.m., thousands were cut off and left to the mercy of the advancing Cossacks. Some became prisoners. Others were simply put out of their misery.
Craziness! What appalling misery! What a multitude have perished in this retreat. Franz Rodier.
Since the retreat began 43 days earlier, the Grande Armée had marched nearly 500 miles under constant attack, starved,
Constant
exhausted,
attack by Mother Nature
for the
and
last
by
3
armies.
days, in lethal sub-zero temperatures, without proper clothing or shelter. In that time, the fighting strength of the Grande Armée had been reduced from around 124,000 men to 20,000, with as many stragglers still following the army. As the retreat continued to Vilna, the weather turned even worse, the temperatures falling to -37 degrees centigrade. The Russian armies at least now held back, leaving the winter, Cossacks and Russian peasants to finish off the invaders. On the 5th of December, Napoleon left the army, traveling incognito across Europe at breakneck speed, and reaching Paris in just 13 days.
He escaped.
Naturally, English satirists capitalized on Napoleon seeming to abandon his defeated army. And many soldiers did regard it as an act of betrayal. But his generals supported his decision to leave. There'd already been one attempted coup against Napoleon in Paris, and there was much work to be done to rebuild the army and reassure France's allies. On the 9th of December, 51 days after the retreat began, around 20,000 ragged survivors of the Grande Armée began crossing the Niemen River back into friendly Polish territory. According to legend, Marshal Ney was the last man across.
Second and third corps are no more than a memory. The latter numbers only 60 men. Wow.
Napoleon's invasion of Russia had proved to be one of the greatest military disasters in history. He had made fatal miscalculations about geography, logistics, and above all, Russia's political and strategic response to his invasion. These blunders cost his empire around 500,000 men, as well as 250,000 horses and 1,000 cannon. Put another way, of every 12 men who marched into Russia with the Grande Armée, one was killed in action or died of wounds. 2 were taken prisoner, one of whom died in captivity. 7 died from disease or the effects of climate. Just 2 returned alive.
Whoa.
Contrary to myth, many more soldiers had died in the summer advance from heat, typhus and dysentery than were lost in the winter retreat. Russian military casualties were estimated at 150,000.
They lost some
A
too.
huge but unknown number of civilian deaths. the Russian campaign was a catastrophe for Napoleon. Not just in lost troops and resources, but in damage to prestige and reputation. That winter, all his enemies sensed weakness and prepared to join forces against him. But the Emperor wasn't going down without a fight. Back in Paris, he admitted to his ministers, "Fortune has dazzled me, gentlemen. I've let it lead me astray. Instead of following my plan, I went to Moscow. I thought I'd make peace there. I stayed too long. I've made a grave mistake, but I'll have the means to repair it."
Man!
All the Patreon supporters.
Woo! That's crazy. I mean, we do some humans are something else, boy. But I guess when you go into battle, you might think you're gonna die, but you still think that you're gonna have a victory. You know what I mean? And I guess that's what's spurring people on. I mean, he's been winning all these years, you know, throughout history, and then he went into Russia. And Mother Nature is what kicked his butt more than anything else, it seems like, in there, you know, all the dysentery dying and wounds. I mean, it get down to 70 degrees and I'm shivering. I can't imagine like 4 degrees below, 37 degrees below. Man, that's some crazy freezing there. I couldn't do it. Luckily, I'm a peaceful type of dude. Because I couldn't do that, man. War. Yeah, we try to romanticize war. There's nothing romantic about it. Even with all of the technology and stuff we have today. You know, no, we just have drones bombing everything, but still on the ground where they're bombing, there's nothing romantic about war. They try to romanticize it, you know, like they have a video of soldiers coming back from war and all that kind of stuff. There's nothing romantic about that stuff, man, you know. Maybe someday we'll figure it out. Maybe someday we'll figure out there's nothing romantic about that. What's romantic is peace. You're chilling, you're watching the sunset, you're watching the moon, you're watching the sunrise, you know what I mean? You go out into the forest, if you live in a forest area, a tropical area where I'm from, you pick some fruit, you eat, you know, you chill, you live in peace. That's romantic. Not all that rah, macho crap. And people running off and killing people for beliefs or religion or politics or money. But anyway, I ain't gonna babble on too much. Back to the Napoleon stuff. I'm glad. Thank you again for pointing it out to me. I thought I was done. I was about to start the Marshals, but I think I have 3 more left in these. If I'm not mistaken, so I'm watching them all. So there we go, thing. Link in the description. Check it out. And in the meantime, man, with everything that's going on around the world, take care of each other, alright? Cool runnings.